You know, if there's one question I get asked more than any other, more even than if you describe something as indescribable, haven't you already described it? That question would have to be, Mark, is the Fed 50 collapsible lens a discreet Soviet marvel, or is it just a red under the bed that's more likely to spike you with a polonium-poisoned umbrella tip than deliver decent photos? Well, today we're going to try and answer that question. This is the Fed 50mm or Industar 10 depending on who you talk to. It's not the Industar 50, that's another collapsible lens but a bit bigger, and don't even bother to Google Fed 10 because you'll probably find some obscure essay about the US Constitution. In fact, Fed is a pretty well-known brand of Soviet camera. The FED acronym refers to Felix Edmundovich Dzerzhinsky, the founder of the Soviet secret police and the man who gave his name to the children's labor camp in Ukraine that became the factory that produced the cameras. Felix sounds like a stand-up bloke to me, and really what child wouldn't want to be given the privilege of assembling delicate optical components in a Soviet gulag, particularly when you produce items as beautiful as the Fed 2 camera and this little jewel of a lens. Both the camera and lens are basically copies of Leicas. The lens is modelled on a Leica Elmar with similar specifications but at a fraction of the cost and without the build quality or assembly tolerances. But hey, there's only so much productivity that you can expect out of a 12-year-old Ukrainian boy fueled on cabbage soup and propaganda. But I digress. The most distinctive characteristic of this lens is its size, or rather lack thereof, because this little optic collapses down to the dimensions of a body cap when it's not in use. Paired with the Fed 2 camera, and you have a small combination that you can fit into a jacket pocket, and it really gives you most of the quality that you need. Now, the Industar 61 is the lens that actually came with the Fed 2 camera, and it's a great lens and probably better in most respects. It's a stop brighter than the Fed lens, but it's big and clunky, while this one is a model of discretion. In fact, it's so discreet it got me wondering if maybe this could be a great little street photography lens. Well, it was the end of August and I found myself in Thimphu in Bhutan, as you do. Now, to get there, you have to actually fly in between mountains to one of the shortest runways in the world in Pyro. There's no radar, and with the thin air of high altitude, it's a fast approach. They only land in the mornings when the weather is usually better, and there are only 50 pilots in the world who are actually qualified to attempt that landing. Fortunately, I'm not a nervous traveller, and I was wearing brown cords anyway. After the circuitous drive through the mountains, past cows and strings of prayer flags, I found myself in the capital. Now, to make things a bit easier on myself, I was using my Canon P rather than a Soviet rangefinder, largely because of the better ergonomics when it comes to loading and selecting shutter speed. As you can see, the Fed fits the Canon just fine and still makes for a compact setup, and I figured that it would just be at least one less complication to deal with. I loaded it up with my go-to bargain film stock Kentmere 100. After a final bout of crippling decision anxiety, akin to the tortuous process of having to select either beef or pork sausages at the supermarket, I ended up settling on pushing it one stop to 200. Why? Mainly because the Fed 50 maxes out at f3.5, and the prediction was that it was going to cloud over and rain that afternoon. But also because I'm naturally rebellious and I like living on the edge of the exposure triangle. Let's go. Oh, you're gonna have to wait for the video camera too. Video camera, GoPro. There you go, thank you. Beautiful things, I think that's how I do it. A much better angle. Won't get much of the background if I'm going to focus on the front pillar. Still, might produce something. That was the end of a bulk roll, so only 20 shots. We'll talk later about the image quality, though I suspect you're already starting to form your own opinions. Thanks for sticking with the video so far, and if you're interested in more content like this, you know what to do. Now, let's talk first about the ergonomics of this thing, because by no means is it perfect. In photography, small size comes with compromises, and that's very evident here. Now, before we start to nitpick though, let's glory in this tiny object. I mean, compare it to this 50mm f1.4 SLR lens. Yes, it's f1.4 compared to the manual f3.5, but it's fat and it's long, even compared to the Fed when it's fully extended. Now, one of the advantages of rangefinders is that they're designed to handle smaller lenses. The rangefinders typically only focus as close as 1 meter, so you're not having to worry about the close focusing distance. And of course, without a mirror, the lens can sit a bit closer to the focal plane. In fact, with this one, it comes right up to the shutter curtain, which of course wouldn't be possible on an SLR. I can personally attest to the pocketability of this because every time I checked into an airport, I always carried this in one jacket pocket and my 100-watt portable power bank in the other, so I could keep my check-in bag under 7 kilograms. But that's the first thing to point out. This may be small, but it's not light, coming in at 111 grams of solid glass and brass. Actually, it's not all brass, but These early rangefinders are not light either, so you combine the lens and body and you're really carrying around something of a noticeable heft. Its ability to collapse into the body makes it great for storage, but of course doesn't help with the shooting experience. It takes far too long to extend the lens barrel out all the way, and it locks turning clockwise when facing the camera. That's fine, but when you try the opposite, turning anti-clockwise to unlock the collapsing mechanism, it's just that bit too easy to unlock the lens itself from the camera body. Don't worry though, because when it comes to this lens accidentally unscrewing itself, there is a bigger culprit, and that's the annoying little lens tab. Its position is a bit too awkward to make it fast to use, but the worst thing about it is this feature that it just locks automatically when it hits infinity. That means that when you want to focus closer, you have to pass through that hard click, or just do what I usually did, which was start unscrewing the lens first by accident. Then when you've screwed the lens back in, remembering to tighten it so you can actually unlock focus. Look, it depends what you want from your camera. If you're looking for something there where you can enjoy the process of photography, it adds another tactile layer to the experience. But if you're wanting the fastest way to just lock in your settings to get that decisive moment, then you may be better off just zone focusing. Aperture is just as fiddly with this little pin on the front of the lens where you make nano adjustments to the aperture ring that can have huge consequences to your exposure. That makes it tricky to quickly set exposure, and it's fair to say that all combined, this isn't a speed demon of a lens. I'm much happier with the clicked aperture ring, with a longer throw, and with just about any modern lens that has a focus tab that allows you to quickly find focus without having to worry about ungainly positioning and that irritating hard stop on infinity. Finally, don't think you're going to be pointing this anywhere near the direction of the sun. Versions after 1947, including this one, do have lens coatings, but it's not a modern formula and no vintage lens is going to perform miracles on flare. Let's add to that the fact that you can't even fit a lens hood on there. There's no filter thread, so your options are probably to find some obscure alternatives or 3D print something yourself. Even my aftermarket lens cap cost me $30, so I'm not hopeful about finding accessories. It does say Leica on it though, so it does explain, I guess, why it costs twice as much as it should. It doesn't sound like I'm giving this lens a good rap, am I? And I do think that all of these things I've said are objectively very true of this lens. But the amazing thing is that they don't add up to create an unpleasant experience. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that this lens is fun. Now, that might partly be because Thimphu is 2,350 meters or 7,710 feet above sea level, and the lack of oxygen was making me dizzy. But you could see from a couple of these that, the combination of the Fed 50 and the Canon P made for a friendly little package that didn't intimidate the locals at all. Fair, I've met a lot of Bhutanese people, and to a person they've been warm, friendly and gracious. I mean, that's what happens when you actually have a focus on societal cohesion and gross national happiness. But hey, no one wants a big professional lens shoved in their face, particularly by some neo-colonial geriatric hipster. So I do feel that the compact size and quaintness of the gear does have something to do with my ability to capture some decisive moments. And sure, it may not be as sharp as a modern lens, but maybe it's just sharp enough. Let's run one more roll of Kentmere through this package and come back and talk about image quality. So it's small and it's cute. It's certainly not light, particularly when mounted on my Canon P, and its ergonomics, to be honest, are so frustrating as to actually be quite comical in use. I mean, think about it. If you want to change aperture, you have to look at the front of the lens and move the aperture ring by a minuscule amount with your fingernails just to adjust it. But everything about this lens makes you want to forgive all of that. And it's not just about its size. To be honest, when I first got it, I thought, yeah, this collapses like my enthusiasm for photography every time I scan my negatives. But the real world experience hasn't been that bad at all. Rather than feeling deflated by the results, I'm actually quite pleased. Certainly surprised at how it's sharp where it needs it and soft where it needs it. I didn't bother to change the aperture too much. Other than a couple of meter readings on my phone, I pretty much used the Sunny 16 rule to guess where exposure was, but instead of adjusting for aperture, I just used a much more reliable knurled shutter knob on the Canon. So most of the time, it was sitting around f8 and that was fine. Now this is a tessar lens with 4 elements in 3 groups, so really simple. And being a tessar design, it's one of those lenses that starts out sharp in the middle, but a bit soft at the corners, and just gets sharper across the frame as you stop down. You'll be pleased to know I'm not going to do a forensic test on this lens today. I'll spare you staring at spines of 1970s encyclopedia. Let's just look instead at a few real-world examples. You can see how it just gives a nice vintage look that is definitely not sharp compared to modern lenses, but still manages to avoid some of the uglier qualities of older and cheaper lenses. It's certainly sharp enough. You can see how on a sunny day it stops down to deliver a crispy image with quite a neutral photo documentary style rendering. If you're wondering, yes, I was the driver of that vehicle, and if you're also wondering, no, it wasn't my fault. What is it with kids just running out in front of you when you're barreling down the highway at 110 kilometers an hour? Look, okay, I'm joking. For the most part, the lens gives you clean results. It does give plenty of character too, but in a refined and quite understated way. It flares not horribly, but in a way that'll lessen the contrast without completely washing things out. You're not going to get much bokeh out of a lens like this, but what is there is pleasant and unobtrusive. Distortion isn't even really worth bothering about. You can see here in these photos that I shot after my GoPro ran out of battery that you can get straight lines out of architecture, if that is your thing. Okay, not quite straight, but I do like my abstract geometric shapes, and this lens's character never becomes unruly when you're trying to impose some sense of order on the world. One of the things that is attractive to me is that I can put it onto my mirrorless Nikon, and while its native lenses are imposing obsidian water towers, this thing sits comfortably on the adapter and even collapses without hitting the sensor. That's always something to check carefully. Compared to other collapsible lenses, the Fed 50/Industar 10 has the smallest profile when closed, but also protrudes the least from the rear. The larger Industar 22, for example, has been known to scratch the sensors on some cameras. The solution is simply to put a rubber band around the barrel so it never fully retracts, but let's face it, that's a kludge, and it turns a beautiful piece of optical engineering into something that looks like a DIY Holga modification. So what about the best photos from this shoot? Trying to hack half a dozen gems out of the Bhutanese bedrock, and we end up with these 6. It was actually tough to choose. There were a few also-rans. I do like this one largely because it has people in it, and I think that this picture really does capture the ornate decoration of the architecture of Thimphu. I don't know though. I like the guy on the left as well, but being out of focus, he does kind of compete with the pillar. I very nearly put this one in because I think it shows how even on a dull day you can manage to squeeze quite a bit of depth of field out of a 50mm lens. But I just noticed that the verticals and horizontals are a little bit wonky, so not really fit for consumption until I straighten them up. So I ended up settling on this one because I just love the rickety ladder. I have to include some others with people in it, of course, to counter the architectural angles because in the end, people are more interesting than things, and those represent the moments that aren't repeatable. Not exactly fly on the wall, but this one definitely sings with the warmth and enthusiasm of Bhutanese people, and I had to include a bus photo. Of course, I still need my fix of the man-made world, so this environmental portrait lets me arrange the humans in the broader scene. Finally, who doesn't love a frame within a frame, just to impose even more order on the natural world? And I guess that ends our little exploration of Bhutan and the Fed 50 or Industar 10. I'm happy with the photographic haul, but maybe you have other opinions. Let me know if these were your favourites or if I'm just as hopeless a curator as I am a photographer. And while you're commenting, tell us if you have this lens or one of the other collapsible Leicas or Soviet copies. Is the minuscule form factor worth the ergonomic compromises, or would I just be better with a more standard lens? Like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. For me, this is a great combination when tackled with the Canon P and Kentmere 100. It's cool but non-threatening, and its modest specifications still allow for some great results. It's not the easiest lens to use in the heat of the moment, and it's not one that I'll be using in every situation. But it's definitely one that I'll be keeping and bringing out when I'm looking for something that's tiny and fun. Later.